Have you ever wondered how a daily journal can go from this to this? I'm Titleless Musings, and in this series, we will be exploring journaling, how to begin, my advice for you as somebody who has journaled for 4 years, and all the different things that come with the art of journaling. We'll discuss how to practice journaling, how to set up a journal, different pages you can add, and my best tips that I wish I had known when I started journaling. Hello and welcome to, or welcome back to my channel. I'm Titleless Musings, and in this 8th episode of the Musings on Journaling series, we'll be going over more personal topics when it comes to journaling, including peer pressure and social media, how to be true to yourself in your journal, why you should or shouldn't censor your journal, etc. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. The first topic I wanted to cover in this video is journaling and peer pressure related to social media. A great way to discover journaling and to find inspiration for your own journal is through social media. With connection being so easy in the world now and so many of us being online, the art of journaling is a beautiful thing that others share with us and that we share with others. I owe a lot to journaling social media, as it inspired me to not only start my own journal, but to take my tips and tricks and share it with others in this series. However, there can be some downsides to finding journals on social media. While I believe the positives of sharing art and creativity outweigh the negatives, let's talk about some things you should be careful of when it comes to journaling and social media. First of all, your journal should not be influenced by others, period. Inspiration and influence are two very different things. If someone posts something and it really gets your creative mind going and inspires you to do something similar, that's brilliant and should be embraced. But if somebody says this is the exact way that you should be journaling, that can change the trajectory of your own journal entirely, and it makes it a less personal space for yourself. This tip is why I give generic advice in this series. You should take the advice or the inspiration from content creators and make it your own, not try to build a journal that is exactly like theirs. Their journals are going to be made of the things that are important to them, the lives they've led, and their experiments with journaling, and that's what yours should be. Think of journaling social media as a guideline or a pool of inspiration, not an exact rule for what you must copy and follow and recreate. After many years of journaling and having to admit to myself that, especially early on, I was really just trying to mimic everybody else's journals, my best bit of advice for healthy inspiration is to always remember your own style. For instance, maybe you see a monthly theme that's a dragon, and that really inspires you to try to do a dragon theme for yourself. But for whatever reason, everything that you draw has to have googly eyes. This is a great way to mix inspiration with personal style, and it makes it so that your journal is representative of your personality. Also remember that not everything needs to be copied either. Just because 800 people are talking about mood trackers does not mean that you need one or that it will even work for you. You should totally give it a shot, and it shouldn't dissuade you from trying, but don't feel like you have to stick with it if it doesn't work for you just because everybody else is trying it. Similarly, if it does work for you but you want to change it up a little bit, you can and should. Inspiration is not a direct copy, but instead something that helps get the creativity moving and gets you to give something a try. As with any social media, you have to remember that people are often just posting the extremes. In journaling, they're posting the absolute most beautiful artwork they made, not showing the 364 other entries that are scribbles and spelling mistakes, just like we all have in our journals. This is why it's so important to be inspired, not influenced. Even myself, the entries I've chosen to share are from positive days, or they're spreads that have taken me hours and that I've perfected down to the very last detail. For privacy, most journal content creators, including me, will not share their most raw and personal entries because of just that. It's personal. I hope that my videos are inspiring you to create your own journal, but believe me when I say these bright and well-organized spreads are the minority in my journal. While working on the script for this video, I thought a lot about how to tackle the topic of censoring or protecting your journal for privacy reasons, because I understand that a lot of you watching this are going to have completely different backgrounds and needs for your journal. Some of you have a very rightful fear of having your journal read, and other people live alone, so that's not a fear that applies to them. Please keep in mind as we go into this kind of censorship part with journaling that this is my opinion based on the way I journal, and you can totally take what you need from this section and forget the rest. I don't censor my journal because for me, there's no reason to. If all my journals end up in the hands of someone else willingly, then to put it plainly, I won't be around to feel embarrassed about what I wrote. If someone is reading it who shouldn't, then I operate under the idea that it's not my fault. I give anyone important to me the express warning that my journals are my private space. They are not to be read. They're a place for me to work through my thoughts, sort out my life, etc. And if they ignore that and read it anyways, not only will that break my trust with them, but that's out of my hands at that point. And it's not my fault if they don't like what's written in there. My journal is my place, and that's what I live by. One of the biggest debates within journaling and whether you censor your journal is names and places. So I always use real names and actual locations or place names in my journal because for me it's more important that I remember the person I'm talking about or the place that I went to than using pseudonyms. Now, again, I will preface this by saying this can be totally dependent on you. If you have somebody that you're worried about reading the journal, you may want to use pseudonyms. I am also very bad with names, so writing them down helps me remember who I'm talking about in the future. As for place names, I also use full place names to remember events or trips because the memory keeping is super important to me. I just don't share those entries outside of a very few close family and friends. Another topic that comes up in journal and censoring your journal is private topics. Now, I differentiate tough topics from private topics. We've touched on tough topics in a previous episode where we define tough topics as heavy things, such as mental health. But for me, I would define private topics as things you just don't want to talk about with others, but still want or need to get off your chest. So for me, this can be stuff like arguments that you've had with friends or text messages from a partner. As with everything I've mentioned so far, I don't censor or not write about these topics. They are important to me in my life, so I write them down, but I'll write myself a little disclaimer. Usually the disclaimer is just something like, oh, here's an argument I had with so-and-so, and it's just intended for me to be able to come back and look at, or a reminder for me to blur it if I ever end up flipping through the journal. Since my journal is so honest, most topics that I write about are ones I consider private because they're just unfiltered and raw thoughts, but that also means that anything goes, and I'll put anything that is on my mind in the journal. So now that we've kind of gone over my opinions on censoring, let's talk about the benefits and the negatives of not censoring. First of all, it's going to be a decision that you have to make, so don't listen to just me or just any other content creator. Give it a try for yourself and see what you're more comfortable with. Not censoring your journal can make it easier to read in the future. The amount of times that I've flipped back through my journals and seen a random detail about someone and been able to remember who I was talking about because of the name, it's happened so many times I can't even put it into words. People come and go from our lives all the time, and being able to connect an event to a person can be very important. Another positive to not censoring is not having something else on your mind when you're writing. If you're trying to just do a stream of conscious journal entry because your friend is just really grinding your gears today, having to stop mid-rant to come up with a false name can be a burden on the thoughts you're trying to have. Another big positive for avoiding censoring is that your journal is allowed to become more open and honest. It truly then becomes a raw and unfiltered place for you to work through and work out your life without adding names, pseudonyms, or random letters that you may forget. Of course, there are also negatives. One being that if anybody ever reads your journal, they'll know how mad you were at Melissa for using the office microwave for too long. In all seriousness, for lots of journalers, the fear of having a journal read is a big and valid concern, and not censoring your journal could make you feel less safe to use it out of fear that someone might read it. Another negative, especially if you're a journal content creator of any scale, is that it is much harder to share your journal if none of it is censored. Sharing your journal should not take first precedent. It's more important that your journal works for you. But if you do have plans or want to share your journal, just keep this in mind. Lastly, on the topic of censorship, let's go over how to keep your journals private and some of my favorite tips. First of all, if you're sharing your journal online, go over any photos or videos that you're going to use with a fine-tooth comb. Make sure you're absolutely sure that you want to share your journal, and make sure you remove anything you don't want public with censors or blurs or sticky notes. For me, I usually use a mix of like paper and then a blur filter that I've applied, but I'll also even just skip parts of the journal entirely. If I'm sure that there's so much on a page I'm going to have to blur, I'll just skip it. Or as you can see on screen now, I'll come up with a mock entry to use so that people can get an example without actually having to see what I write. In order to keep your journal private in your day-to-day life, find a place where you're comfortable with keeping it. Perhaps you keep it near your bed or in a drawer. It should be somewhere that you can easily access it when you need it, but that other people won't be tempted to look. Lastly, if you take your journal in public with you, don't feel like you have to write about super deep private topics in public spaces. If I were to take my journal on a trip to a coffee shop, for instance, I'd write notes to remind myself later of what I want to go deeper on. It's maybe too private to write with other people around, but when I am around others, I'll write about more superficial topics, or things that I don't necessarily mind if someone sees over my shoulder, such as how work is going or what the weather is like. Having a fear of journaling is something that most of us are going to come face to face to with our journaling experience. Getting comfortable with journaling for me took a long time. I used to write about only music or only the things that I saw other people writing about, but getting comfortable enough to journal honestly took me more than a few months. I kept pushing myself out of that comfort zone by trying to write more honestly each day, whether it be emotions I was feeling or somebody I wanted to talk about. It can be difficult to acknowledge your own deepest thoughts, even in a private place, but I'm so glad I did because my journal has really helped me grow. As with most people, I still have my own fears of journaling. One fear I have is forgetting to fill out an entry, or becoming too busy that I ignore the journal entirely. Since journaling is so important to me, I feel almost a sense of guilt if I miss a day for any reason that I personally deem invalid. Another fear that I have with journaling is that others will read some of my most personal thoughts and feelings. I'm not necessarily worried about it from the people around me, but more that I'll be unable to pass my journal down to kids or grandkids, or that someone will accidentally see what I'm writing and it'll make me want to stop journaling entirely. When it comes to tackling these fears, with my first fear, I just have to remind myself that missing days is totally normal and okay. We're not always in the mood to journal, and I'm already journaling a lot as it is. As long as I'm doing my best, that's good enough. With my second fear, I try and calm my nerves in two ways. One, passing the journal down means nothing if it doesn't suit me right now. What I mean by this is, if I'm not comfortable enough to have my journal be a personal space for myself, then there's no point in me doing it. So if that means I don't hand it down, then so be it. The second thing I do is remind myself of what I mentioned earlier. If people read it who aren't supposed to, that's not my fault. If it's an accident, then that's no one's fault. But if they read it intentionally, that's on them, and I'm not going to apologize for being honest in a space that is so personally and privately mine. The last thing I wanted to touch on in this video is being true to yourself when it comes to journaling. We've talked a lot in this series so far about how to write about tough topics, how to write about personal topics, how to handle emotions in journaling, etc. But we've not really discussed how to actually be true to yourself while journaling. So first of all, let's go over how to address your feelings honestly. When you sit down to journal about your feelings, I advise that you brain dump first. Just get everything off your chest. I'm a firm believer that you can't begin addressing anything until you know the entirety of what is on your mind. A lot of times for me, I'll do this on the notes app on my phone because my brain is thinking too fast for me to write, and then I'll rewrite it in my journal once I'm a bit calmer and have worked through some of the initial things I'm feeling. By getting everything off your chest and onto paper or into a digital notes app, you can find out what's bothering you, where you want to start with addressing your feelings, etc. After you've done that, pay attention to how you're feeling. Are you feeling like you just can't deal with these feelings right now? Write that down. Are you feeling like you just need to rant or just to zone out to some music? That's a valid thing to go and do as well. I personally like to write what I feel like I need after writing my thoughts down, and that may be something you want to try. Whether or not you choose to write about where you're at when it comes to processing these feelings, being honest and truly writing things down as you're feeling them will allow you to get more comfortable with journaling and address your feelings honestly. As you get more comfortable with writing them down, you can look back on these entries and discover how you handle situations or what your limits are. There are so many benefits to being honest and allowing yourself to really feel your feelings in your journal, and if you are comfortable with it, I highly recommend it. For our last subtopic in this video, let's talk about self-critique versus plain criticism. As with giving someone else constructive criticism compared to just being mean to them, there's a big difference between self-criticizing and self-critiquing, and this goes hand in hand with being open about your feelings. You should go into journaling expecting to have some self-critique because that's how you use your journal to grow and develop as a person. For me, being honest with myself means growing to love different parts of myself and the life that I've made for myself, but also being able to critique myself when I've made bad decisions. As I said in a previous video, a bad decision doesn't make you a bad person, but if you're being honest in your journal, you do have to be prepared to call yourself out. That doesn't mean that you bully yourself, use names with yourself, or put yourself down, but that you can have an honest conversation within the pages about what went wrong, what you do different, or what you're just not proud of. This is a big part of being open and honest about your feelings. Give yourself your fair share of very well-deserved compliments, but also recognize that there will be times where you don't agree with what you said or did. Today's video was one I was excited to cover because I think all journalers, regardless of how long we've been journaling, can relate to privacy fears and the pain of peer pressure. At the end of the day, take this one bit of advice. If your journal makes you happy, it is perfect because your eyes on it are the only eyes that matter. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch my video. Please do consider liking and subscribing to stay tuned with the series, and feel free to drop your questions or comments below. I'll be adding questions to upcoming videos to help you get better acquainted with daily journaling. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.